Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dyson Leadership Podcast, where I bring on engaging guests, leadership coaches, trainers, business owners, executives to come on and share key insights that they've learned throughout their career and share and pass that along to you. So today I'm joined by Cory Dunham, who has some insights and some things that he's excited to share here on the podcast. And I'm looking forward to having him on as a guest so that he can share some of his insights, some of his wisdoms and lessons learned with our podcast audience today. So Cory, how about you go ahead for our podcast audience and just introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do, your background, and just some brief things that you would like our podcast audience to know about you before we jump into more of our topic for today.
Sure. Just a brief background about me. I live in Michigan, born in Chicago, but promptly when I was a baby, we moved to Michigan here to the other side of my family. So I've been raised here. Let me see. I've been married 25 years this year and have 3 young adult kids, and went to Eastern Michigan University after high school and graduated right when the internet was getting started. So that was like the early 90s. When I graduated in manufacturing technology. So I just kind of had a general degree, didn't know what I wanted to do coming out of school. But it turns out I was working at my dad's agency, marketing agency that he had started for our family back in 1980. We still own and run that today. And I've also outlined some additional leadership services or leadership coaching and also speaking services where I can help individuals, executives, entrepreneurs, and their teams to grow their leadership and communication, and of course, create the kind of lives, not just businesses and work environments, but create their personal lives the way they want to create it on their terms.
Absolutely. And I know that's a lot of the reason that I do leadership coaching and training as well, is wanting to see the people development. And that's the biggest reward when people ask me, why do I do what I do in that regard? It's to see the people when their eyes light up, the aha moment of, well, if I change this one thing, then, I'm going to be better off. Or if I make this one adjustment, my career is going to go to the next level. And seeing those types of interactions with people, it's so rewarding from that perspective. So it's one reason I'm always happy to have another leadership coach or trainer on the podcast, because we have something in common. And even though we've maybe have never spoken prior to a podcast episode, maybe outside of emails or text or whatever it may be, we already have a connection and something that brings us together. So, Cory, I know in our correspondence leading up to the episode, we talked about a lot of different things, a lot of different ideas. But one thing that you were passionate about, and one thing you talked about from your past and your story, was the idea of living an authentic life, that there was a period in your life where you really didn't feel like you were living kind of your authentic self, almost a living a double life, trying to be one thing for some people and another for some other groups of people. So for our podcast today, I think that's what kind of we're going to focus a little bit more on. So how about you give us an idea what that comes from and kind of what you were learning as you were going through that experience?
Yeah, so and just to be upfront here too, I am currently just turned 56 years old. So through many different life experiences and kind of going through life, realizing, oh my goodness, my next major milestone of age, if I hit it, or decade, is going to be 60, God willing. And just realizing I don't have that much time left. And I think I've been going through the motions through a lot of life, just thinking, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll pursue that tomorrow. I'll take action toward my vision tomorrow. And you only get so many tomorrows and nothing's promised. And I know I've been very blessed, very fortunate throughout my life. Haven't had, I don't think, too many challenges that are devastating, unless it's because of all the mindset things I've learned over time, and to kind of shift those and transform those into sometimes wins. How can I turn this terrible challenge that I've had into an opportunity to be either a win or an insight or something that's going to help me or somebody else down the road. So just going through life in that way, and getting married. My wife and I, we have 3 kids. They're the youngest is 17, senior in high school. and then 2 are in college. They're 20 and 22 years old. And just in the mix of that, having kids, that also takes up a lot of your time and energy. And if you're not intentional, a lot of things can kind of go by the wayside and you just forget and you just go through the motions. So I think mainly through my age and some other things in life, it's like, wait a minute, why am I wasting time? Why am I just really not, in my opinion, not being a great example, both for my kids, the people I coach, people in my community? Why am I not being a great example of truly, passionately, and authentically living my life? Because there's nothing worse than a hypocrite. We're all, we may get great advice from all different types of people and things, but if we're not leading by example, which is one thing I've been coached on, is if you could define leadership by one word, it's by example, the example you set for other people, and that you're continually willing to do. That might transform somewhat, but there's still a leadership example, not just wordplay or lip play, whatever. So I think that's important. So, I mean, there's a lot of things in life I've learned. One of the biggest things for me is not having the confidence in myself. Other people have had confidence in me, coaches, mentors, relatives, uncles, you name it. They've had confidence in me, but I never really chose to believe that until probably the last 10 years or so. It's like, yeah, I can get by succeeding a little bit, but I can never have the big successes. That's just not my identity. So, and I think the only difference there is just I do have the potential to accomplish so many things. And I found this out because there's a lot of people out there that I respect, I look up to. They have notable achievements, and come to find out every one of them I talk to says, Cory, either I'm an introvert, that's how I've grown up as an introvert. Either I'm an introvert or I don't like speaking. I'm not good at it. I don't like myself in many different ways. But I'm like, but you perform and you lead so well. And they just say, well, I've just learned those skill sets and I've learned to do what it takes. And so that's one of my close mentors has told me, he's like, Cory, if you have a goal, a vision on something, learn to do what it takes to accomplish that goal, which means there's going to be some sacrifices. You're going to miss out on some things. And then there's going to be some activities you might need to become better at or develop your skill sets in terms of many of those things.
There's so many key things that you've shared. And so I just want to reiterate a couple of them that resonated with me just as you were speaking and sharing a little bit. So one thing for me, you talked about wasting time. And even for me at my age, that's something I realized years ago that was important and made a major adjustment. And so I've done so many training sessions on time management because this is something that's important to a lot of people, is the idea of stop wasting time. And one of the things that impacted me, and this is one of the things that I see for a lot of people, is we do things that waste our time that we don't even realize are wasting our time. So for me, here's a couple examples, and this is something that I've shared with many people. I love playing video games. That's one way I kind of decompress and relax. That's something there. But it very quickly can consume my time, where I sit down and think, okay, I'm just going to play for an hour, and that's going to kind of relax, decompress, and then I'm done. The next thing I know is it 2, 3, 4 hours that have gone by. Then how many hours have I just lost in a day because I wasn't disciplined enough to actually have a limit? Kind of similar, I'm a millennial, so we think younger individuals who have a lot of social media. It's very easy to open up any social media platform, click on the videos, and just start scrolling. And next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by or an hour has gone by, and you didn't intend to spend that long on those things. But now all of a sudden you've wasted so much time that could have been for other things. So for me, starting my business, Dyson Leadership, doing this podcast and so many other things, I had to evaluate, where am I spending my time? And ultimately there are trade-offs. John Maxwell teaches the law of trade-offs in his leadership training, but you have to give up something to go up or gain something else. Sometimes I had to give up a little bit of entertainment or a little bit of sitting and watching Netflix or something else to start a business and to start impacting people as a leadership trainer. So rewarding and so fulfilling, but I had to give up something and focus my time to get there. So that's one thing that kind of resonated with me is, as you were sharing, that's really important for a lot of people. Now, one of the other aspects that really resonated, you talked about kind of the eye-opening and getting married and having kids and those family dynamics changing and kind of evaluating and seeing. It's one thing I've given credit to is one of the biggest lessons that I've gotten in leadership is, I always thought I knew a lot, had a lot of information, and I could teach a lot of information. And it was really impactful when I got married to then see, okay, I know a lot about communication, but when you're in the trenches, like I can tell people this is how you navigate conversations, but when you are the person in the trenches, that's a little bit different. And you have to figure out how to navigate. And it's okay, I've learned all of this stuff, but how do I actually put it into a good practice myself? And it's different for everybody. I can tell people what the principles are, but I can't tell them exactly how to apply them in every instance. But yet I learned so much in the course of being married and navigating that early marriage relationship, because there's so many important things from a leadership perspective, a personal development perspective, a time management perspective, communication. You learn all of those in those impactful relationships. And so for a podcast audience, just kind of a thought to share. If you are dating, married, in a serious relationship in some way, maybe it's a relationship between you and aging parents or you and close friends, look at those relationships and just evaluate how you learn lessons that can apply to your professional life, your career, or even other areas of your personal life, because there are lessons to be learned in those areas. So Cory, that was a couple things just kind of resonated with me, a couple thoughts that kind of stood out. So something else that was kind of interesting, and I want you to elaborate a little bit more, but you talked about lacking the self-confidence. And that's something I believe that does impact that authenticity side of things, where when you don't feel like you're able or capable, then you do try to live almost people pleasing in those different areas. Well, I'm not good enough to do that, so I'll put myself down and let somebody else take that role. How did you navigate some of those situations, and what helped you overcome some of those scenarios?
Yeah, some of the biggest pieces is where I've had to really do a self-assessment and really ask myself some deeper questions and then take the time to be willing to answer them. It's not just, oh, I did that yesterday, I did my homework. It's something you have to think about over time and the many different areas of life, whether it's your family, your fitness, your health, your finances, your friends, your community, a number of different areas of life that are important to consider. I know at least initially, I only considered just the money aspect of things. Oh, what kind of house do I want to live in? How much money do I want in the bank? And that's all I considered. And after I feel wasting decades, literally decades, on just focusing on that empty goal for myself, finances are important to me, but it's not the only thing. But by wasting all that time, like, oh my gosh, that does not motivate me at all. And finally realizing, pulling back, that one of my number one values for me that really fuels me, that I was kind of not an imposter. I just wasn't connecting. I wasn't authentic with this, which is my faith. I know I come from God. I'm a Christian. I know that Christ saved me and died for my sins. And number one, that knowing from what Scripture tells us is that we are all created in the image of God. And I never, going back to your question, I never really joined myself with that idea that God created me. And as some people have said, God don't create no junk. And I've never looked at it. Wow, if he created me in my image, it's like, what am I capable of? What kind of vision is there for my life? And once I started really tapping in that over the last few years, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think God's calling me to serve people, to help uplift people. That's both youth. I've been in youth ministry for 30 years, but I've never had the confidence to say, ooh, I'm a leadership coach of youth or of anything. I've been a part of our current marketing business we've had for 44 years. I've been here 38 years, and we have coached and mentored some business professionals, some entrepreneurs, and some large international corporations, but I never identified myself with that confidence to say, oh, I coach entrepreneurs, I coach executives. So I think really embodying and really getting deep with where you come from and what the vision of your life is. And for me, that just happened to be my faith. Not that that's for everybody, but by identifying with that, I can move forward more confidently to say, wow, even if I fail, because I've also had this issue of failing. I don't want to try anything new because I might fail. But of course, through those failings are excellent learning opportunities. So they're opportunities and they're not failings. And I've had to learn to redefine that, what that looked like for me, and to be able to experiment and have an adventure and be able to learn things. So it's just learning where I came from and who I was empowered by and the vision I have for my life. I may not know everything I'm going to do. I may not be successful, but I know that relationships with me, with my family, with other people, with uplifting other couples that are married, because being married is not an easy task. And that I thought I'd be excellent at it, but it's like, oh my gosh, my emotions are getting involved. And I'm right most of the time. Of course, I'm not. But you feel like you're right. It's like, how come this person doesn't understand what I'm talking about? And so those are different ways we have to navigate through some of those situations. And, I think our family, if you have close relationships and family, whatever it is, friends, those are the best areas to be able to practice and to become patient and listen and learn. Listening was another thing I've had to really work at because my attention span has been very short. So I think just really tapping into who you are, who you already are, because confidence, if I can put it this way, we come in, from what I know from scripture, is that we come in pretty much as 100% loved and valued and powerful or capable. Nothing can take that away. It's just when we start moving on in life, when we start adopting these other stories that say we're less than, or we're not capable, or we're not worthy of. And those are stories we're telling ourselves, or we're listening to somebody else's story about us saying that we're not capable or worthy. Well, that's not the truth. You're already capable and worthy. Now it's just a matter of you believing it and developing some skill sets, some confidences. And this is very similar when I got 32 years ago, roughly, when I got just a private pilot's license. But I shouldn't even be a pilot today based on me not liking roller coasters and getting car sick and motion sickness. But because I kept taking one step at a time, trusting my mentors or my flight instructor and other people, being in the right environment of people who could lift me up. That's been a huge thing over time, because if it was left to me and my own devices and myself, I probably wouldn't be where I am today in the many different areas of life. And I wouldn't be sharing and trying to help other people to lift them up either.
Sure, absolutely. So one thing, I'm a person of faith, a Christian as well. And a lot of what you're sharing very much is kind of where I'm at as well. I think about it, and this is one challenge, is often other people will be the most critical and give you a lot of negative mindsets, because that's been the case for me in a lot of instances. I think back to even different instances where people have told me that I need more professional experience or more just life experience before I could teach in certain areas, maybe within a church or maybe within a certain group, a small group or something. And I remember that got in my head, where even for me, after completing graduate school, I really wanted to teach at a college. And all I was hearing was all of those comments of, you need more experience, you don't know enough, you need to do these things and complete these tasks, and then you will be worthy enough to be in this role. And I let that stop me from even applying to teaching roles. Just, I wanted to do it part-time on the side. And it became an issue, and it took me getting over that to finally ask and engage and talk. And now I am a part-time instructor for 2 separate colleges, one of them being a university. And so it's one of those, when you get over that and move past, you have those opportunities. And even for me, starting my business, Dyson Leadership, doing the leadership training, I felt very much that was a calling for me, that God wanted me to teach and train and to invest into other people and help them. And it was to make a difference. And I fully believe that. And that's one of my biggest drives for what I do. So I resonate with you on that part as well. And I remember when I talked to people, sharing with friends and family what I was wanting to do, I constantly was getting the negative. And I'm like, but I believe this is what I'm supposed to do. But I was constantly hearing negative. Even an individual I do respect greatly just very simply when I was talking about it, and I said, yeah, it's a struggle building a business. I'm facing these challenges and navigating them, but I know it's normal. I'm friends with a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm navigating these types of challenges and situations. And it was just, well, maybe you don't have enough experience and people aren't going to talk to you. And it was just constantly just shot down immediately. And the thought was in my head because I had already navigated all of those difficult, negative conversations. I had grounded my mind in, I still believe this is what God wants me to do. And no matter how long it takes me to grow and build it, it's in His timing, and I'm just going to be faithful to pursue it and work on it. And so when I hear those negative conversations, that's what I go back to. I'm just being faithful. And if it takes a year, if it takes 5 years, if it takes 10 years, I'm just being faithful in what I know I'm supposed to do, and nobody's going to turn me down from that. Do I still have bad days? Absolutely. We all do. You get the negative, you have a bad day. It's tough, but I have to go back to what I'm grounded in. And I think that's a lot of what you're talking about, is that sense of identity. Who am I? What's my purpose, my calling? What's the motivation or drive that that keeps me going and focused on what I'm doing? Those are the important things that make a difference. And I think that kind of our topic of authenticity, I think that's the biggest thing for most people, is when you have an intentional goal, you have a key motivation, you're grounded in faith or something that truly is deep within you to your core. It's really hard to pull you away from that and sway you off of that. And when you start letting it be who you are, it makes all the difference. It's one thing for me, it's kind of funny when you made the comment that for a long time you didn't share, oh, I'm a leadership coach, or, oh, I do these things. I was the same way. I started Dyson Leadership, and for the first probably 8 months, I didn't even want to tell anybody that I owned a small business or was an entrepreneur, because they're going to ask what I do. Am I really ready? Can I actually tell them what I do? Are they going to believe me? Are they just going to think this is some ridiculous thing? And so I was telling myself all of that. And as a result, I pretty much made no customers. But it took me getting past that mindset and saying, okay, well, I've got to tell people this is what I'm doing. This is what my purpose is. Started living more authentically to myself, and it makes a huge difference. So many key insights. So from your perspective, what you've learned, what you've lived, Cory, what is some advice that you would give people who are maybe struggling with those negative thoughts or the back and forth and the little bit of uncertainty? What's some things you would recommend to them that they could take from this podcast and start to evaluate in their life?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is once again, figuring out where you come from, what your identity is right now. A lot of us think we just plop on the earth and we just come in as we come, but we come in by design. There's no happenstance or by chance. There's a reason and a purpose that you're here, and really leaning into that and knowing that. And then, as you said, on a couple of things there is really knowing the vision. Okay, where do you want to go? What do you feel you want to go? And for you and for me, it's tapping into and trusting in God to say, hey, God, lead me to where you want to use me in this world. Because there's a million different things we can do, as you alluded to, social media, this and that, or different skill sets and topics. We can be distracted in many different areas, but once you truly resonate with what that identity is, what your purpose, you can get passionate about that. And like you said, it's very difficult to take you away from that. So for me, relationships, if I could sum up one word, relationships is the biggest thing that fuels me right now. And I love developing relationships, love getting to know people, love hearing their story. Come to find out, we all have very, very similar stories in terms of our insecurities or maybe goals that we have for our life. But there's not too many people building us up. There's not too many things out there or the environment we're in that really builds us up. And I think, sure, you can use apps and online things to build you up, or reading, obviously, reading the Bible, reading positive affirmations, saying positive affirmations, all different types of things, but having a community of people around you that truly lifts you up. One saying I've heard, which I think is so true, that it's been said that you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with, or your income is the average of the 5 people you hang out with most.
I've heard that many times myself.
Yes, and everybody I've heard that's that knows about that and they've considered it. They're like, oh my gosh, you're right. I'm pretty much right there in the middle. And so if we hang around with different types of people, like for instance, once I started getting into the aviation community or to my faith when I was doing youth leadership, or finally skydiving, because it took me like almost 30 years to skydive, because I've always been afraid of heights, never liked roller coasters growing up, all of that stuff. But once I started getting around those people, I found even in the skydiving community, some of my instructors, because I went skydiving twice about 5 years ago, one of my skydiving instructors was a surgeon in the hospital. And I'm like, why are you doing this dangerous sport? I'm thinking, but that's just a piece of that particular person. They're a surgeon, they're a skydive instructor, they have other qualities. So there's many different things you can do, but you have to kind of lean into it and find people that are either doing that thing. As you said, being an entrepreneur was a huge thing. Being around people who are just employees, not that they can't give you great advice, but somebody who's an actual entrepreneur going through some of the challenges, some of the successes, some of the time freedoms and flexibilities. You understand it just a little bit more. Just like talking to somebody about parenting. I used to give advice before I was a parent, and I know a lot of people give advice before they're parents, and they're not parents. I'm like, you have no idea until you become a parent, or married or whatever it is. So you get a little bit better advice if that person's doing it. So one of the biggest things, confidence, is that keep taking at least a step closer. You don't have to be 30% better or 30% closer. You can be 1% closer. And if you take a step every day in the direction of what you want to be, and as you said, I felt like imposter syndrome when saying, hey, I'm a leadership coach. And I'm like, and it took me the longest time to say that. And I've even told people I'm a faith-based leadership coach also, if people have those characteristics. And that was very difficult and scary. However, once I started doing it, which if we look in scripture, that's exactly how God created everything. It's through his words. He didn't do it with pixie dust or duct tape or anything else. It was just through the words. So when people speak something and you speak that into your life, that this is what's going to happen, or this is who I am, that's powerful, because that's an built-in mechanism to help us to become the people we need to become. And we're always changing. In most cases, we're always growing and learning something new. But just keeping willing to take steps every day, even if they're scary. Don't take big scary steps. Take little scary steps and just move a little bit out of your comfort zone. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's helped me, and including some of the couple of mentors in the last year have said the biggest thing in my success from not having success was just taking action. If we're just giving lip service or having all this intellectual knowledge, that doesn't do much. But once you start taking action on the little bit that you know, that's where it's going to make the difference.
Absolutely. And there's no way I'm going to try to add to or top anything that Cory just shared. It's a podcast audience. You can rewind, you can go back, you can listen again. That is some awesome, fantastic advice. The one thing that I will reiterate, just because it has been vital and impactful for me, is the relationships aspect. Because those who are around you, if you find that positive community, those who can interact, encourage you, keep you going, keep you motivated, that is huge. But also just finding people with similar stories, similar struggles, people that can identify and help you is actually part of the reason I started this podcast, funny enough, is started reaching out to connections I knew just to chat with them. And then they recommended connections, and people have reached out to me that I didn't even know at all. And I get a chance to meet all these new and unique people, to make their acquaintance, to maybe connect with them on LinkedIn or social media or other things, and have genuinely, there's a couple podcast guests that I did not know prior to chatting with them at all. Like maybe there was an email exchange, and yet we actually talk back and forth on a regular basis now because we have things in common. We're really connected and resonated. That's not every guest, but that is a couple. And it's so fascinating to me that I'm just sitting here starting a podcast as a free thing to get some advice out to people in my network and other networks and share it on social media. And all of a sudden I'm getting a benefit out of it from relationships. So relationships are huge. They're important. And I love that aspect. So Cory, we are pretty much at the end of our time. So I've got two final things that I want to kind of toss out at you, and we'll wrap up our episode today. So we've talked a lot about a lot of different advice, lots of different things, living authentically, overcoming challenges. We've talked about a bunch, but especially you being somebody involved in youth leadership, working with young people and being a leadership coach, when you're working with people who are young and they're just getting started, maybe it's in college or as a young professional or whatever age range kind of in that you specialize in. But when you're working with people in that area, what do you think is one key point of advice that you recommend to them the most as they're getting started in their journey?
Yeah, there's a lot of things I could say about that, but just one thing that could help them out is I think I have to go back to who you hang around, what you listen to, what gets input into your head is going to be one of the big difference makers. And I think for me, it has to be a person that ideally you can talk to, a person maybe that's in your local area, or if it's just online, whatever it may be. But developing that connection and relationship, I think it's going to be a huge thing. Because when I have somebody who maybe is my accountability partner or somebody I trust, and they say something that they believe in me, that they know I can achieve something, or that, hey, they understand I'm going through a challenge, they feel for me. That makes a huge difference than just me reading that online or dealing with something that's just digital. But like I say, even if it's through a Zoom or a digital meeting, whatever it is, if it's a person, somehow I just think people resonate better with people. And right now we're in front of too many digital mediums and distractions right now. But when you develop those connections, and like you said, you develop a handful of connections, very deep ones that people you still talk to, which is pretty amazing through your podcast. I think that's going to be amazing, because what I found, at least in my life, from the friends you start off with, most of them don't end up being around 10, 20, 30 years later. It seems like there's just a few that you might keep that deeper relationship with. It's real, it's raw, and you're not just patting each other on the back all the time, but you're sharing in some of those challenges and can uplift and help each other. So really, really find somebody that you can, that will lift you up is the one thing I can say. Find somebody that will lift you up.
Yeah, that's some great advice. So, Cory, for the podcast audience here, and for those that maybe want to connect with you or learn more about you, what are some ways people can reach out or connect with you?
Yeah, there's probably a few ways. One is on LinkedIn. I don't have my link in front of me right now, but I'm on
I'll
LinkedIn.
Put it in the podcast description.
Fantastic. So and my name is Cory Dunham. And you can also go to my website, which is corydunham.com, CORYDUNHAM.com. And then I have a phone number of 734-219-5234 where they can give me a call. But love to chat with anybody or discuss opportunities. And one thing, if I could say real quick, the funny thing about me, because you asked about age of who I work with, and I work all the way to adults. But I did a speaking engagement, a workshop conference in Minneapolis back in October for a fractional business conference. And I did that on a Monday. And I got back home in Michigan on a Tuesday, and I was at a daycare talking to 3-year-olds about aviation and airplanes. And so I run the gamut, and I love all people. But the younger ones tend to be a little more open, a little more adventurous and curious. So they're always a fun group. Yeah, I run the gamut. So I thought that was kind of funny when I look back at them, like, oh my gosh. So
that is funny. That's an interesting little note that we can kind of end on. So podcast audience, for Cory's contact information, check the podcast description wherever you listen to the podcast, check the description. His information will be down there. My information's always down there. Be sure to check back on a regular basis for more episodes of the Dyson Leadership Podcast. Subscribe, follow along. Got a bunch more guests that are planning to be on the podcast, going to be joining me as we go into 2025. So I'm excited to share more content with you all here on the podcast. Thank you for being with us, and tune in again for another one very soon.